Hello everyone, it's Theme Park Avenue, I'm Eric. Busch Gardens Williamsburg in Williamsburg, Virginia is one of my favorite theme parks I've ever been to. It has immaculate landscaping, great theming, a wonderful atmosphere, and of course, great rides. I have been to the park 3 times in my life, once in summer 2012 when I was just 7 years old, once exactly 2 years ago today, and just last week. And across these visits, I've gotten on every currently operating coaster at the park, finally. And I was going to do a ranking of the top 10 coasters. However, there are other rides at Busch Gardens Williamsburg that I enjoy so much that I simply had to talk about them too. So I will be talking about all the major coasters in here in one way or another, but I'll also be talking about many rides that are not coasters. And I plan for this to be one of my most thorough rankings yet. So just to be clear, there is going to be a lot of negativity here. I'll be talking about pretty much every tiny detail that I noticed while riding these rides, whether positive or negative. And it may seem like I dislike the stuff, so I must preface by saying, I think every ride in the top 10 is very, very good, and I love all of them. There are so many small things I appreciate and want to discuss. There are also several small things that slightly take away from the experience, and I want to be as thorough as possible because these rides really do deserve it. The park as a whole deserves it. So with all of that out of the way, let's begin by talking about which rides were not eligible for the list. The most obvious is the Big Bad Wolf, Wolf's Revenge. That coaster is not open yet, so I have not been on it, so it does not count. The next one may be disappointing for the family audience that might be watching this. I am not going to have any kiddie rides on the list. Busch Gardens Williamsburg has 2 kiddie areas and a variety of good kiddie rides. But I am much more a thrill seeker, so I'm not going to talk about anything in Sesame Street Forest of Fun or Land of the Dragons. But I will be talking about plenty of family-friendly rides, so make sure you stick around for that. Additionally, there are thrill rides that I have not been at the park, but I am very confident, 99% at least, that they would not have made the top 10. The top 10 rides at Busch Gardens Williamsburg are all truly fantastic to me, and common rides I've been on at several parks before, such as der Wirbelwind, the Battering Ram, and the Catapult, are not the kind of thing I would typically have in my top 10 next to these other great rides. So while I do enjoy things like the Scrambler, I am very certain that it would not have made the list. With all that out of the way, let's get to the real roller coaster and ride discussion. But before getting to the actual top 10, I have 2 honorable mentions. The first goes to a water ride. There are 3 water rides at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. There's Roman Rapids, which I have done, but was generally not a huge fan of. It's a good river rapids ride, but not one of the best, and not strong enough for the top 10. There's also Les Scoots, a log flume with a great setting, and a very fun name in my opinion. However, I have not been on that one. But once again, it doesn't seem like a spectacular enough log flume to be in the top 10 at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. The ride I do want to give the honorable mention to is Escape from Pompeii, a shoot the chutes water ride, which is certainly fun. These rides are typically enjoyable for the massive splashdown at the end, and little else. But Busch Gardens Williamsburg's Escape from Pompeii does expand upon this, as instead of a very lightly, if at all, themed part before the main drop, you enter the gorgeous facade, and you see so many cool effects, primarily based around fire. And while I do wish the ride was more themed to being set in that ancient time, and you're actually going to Pompeii, as opposed to being at an excavation site of some sort, I still think it looks great, and adds a level of character and immersion to the ride that most shoot the chutes do not have. Therefore, this would probably be my number 11 favorite ride at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. Now for the other honorable mention, Darkoaster. Darkoaster is the only major roller coaster to not make the top 10. This is an indoor family launch coaster that mainly missed out on the top 10 due to being the least thrilling of the major roller coasters. It's intended for families, which is fine, just not generally up my alley as much. That said, the second launch is pretty powerful, and a good moment overall despite the slight headbang that I did get from it. But all in all, it is a good family thrill coaster. But I'm not done talking about it. There is so much to unravel with this one. For those who do not know, Darkoaster is a sort of successor to a dark ride that was housed in the same building, known as Curse of Dark Castle. I went on this ride back in 2012, and it scared me. My eyes were closed for most of it. But looking back, it was no doubt a very good dark ride. Using the same ride system as the Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man at Universal, it was a pretty solid use of that system, with decent screens, only slightly dated honestly based on when the ride was made and when the ride closed, plenty of imaginative scenes, a very dark overall theme, a good pre-show, and in general, just a very engaging ride full of character. One thing I did dislike about it looking at the POVs was the fact that it clearly copied Spider-Man in the sense of using one-liners for the villain, and I think when the villain is not Dr. Octopus, and is instead a mad king that killed his mother, it's just not quite as fitting. That is a minor thing, but no doubt, Dark Castle was a great dark ride. Darkoaster had some serious guts keeping the same name as the original ride. I really think Busch Gardens Williamsburg should have changed the name. So little about this resembles the original ride. You have the same facade, and that might trick people into thinking it'll be a similar ride and a good continuation. But in terms of story, the only actual sign you have is one plaque that kinda sums up the original lore. There's no pre-show, instead there's a single portrait where there's some animations playing with no sound when I went. And most of the queue is littered with snowmobile equipment to sell the theme that you're on a snowmobile going into a winter storm near Dark Castle. I think the idea is you don't actually go into Dark Castle. You're just kind of on the grounds. So no silverware or armory like in the original. It's fine, but I feel like if any Darkoaster fan goes into this ride expecting something like the original or even based on the original, I feel very bad for them. This was just a bad choice in my opinion. I get they wanted to bring people in saying, hey, we finally replaced Dark Castle. And it is still Dark Castle by being Darkoaster. But unfortunately, the ride just doesn't live up to that. And in terms of the theming, many have said, such as Coaster Studios for example, that it's underwhelming, but I watched his POV, and there were triple the effects when I went on it, so I may have gotten unlucky in terms of the theming. Ultimately, this tangent I just went on is not very important in the ranking. It really doesn't influence my opinion of the roller coaster itself that much. It wasn't going to make top 10 anyway. But if Busch Gardens Williamsburg sees this one, what were you guys thinking with the name? Alright, that was fun to get off my chest actually, so let's get into the actual top 10 now. Number 10 is Loch Ness Monster. The oldest roller coaster in the park, this aerodynamics looping coaster has some unique strengths for the model, but unfortunately, it does have some unique weaknesses as well. In terms of shared weaknesses, there is a bit of jankiness to this one. That is to be expected from an older ride, of course. And many aerodynamics loopers are much, much worse in this regard. There's really only one or two moments of notable headbanging for me, though they did hurt my head quite a lot. But luckily, that is really the only major complaints I have. The unique issue this one does have actually does play into one of the main strengths. That issue is the pacing. This is not one lift hill you go through the loops and then you're done like many aero loopers. Instead, it's a very slow, meandering ride, much more reminiscent of a Schwarzkopf looping coaster, such as Super Duper Looper at Hershey Park. This is not a huge issue, but it does kind of feel like a collection of moments, as opposed to the strong cohesive layout that other great roller coasters in the park can be. I will be talking about that sort of brake run thing a little more often later on, but let's leave it at that for now. In terms of the unique, great strengths for Loch Ness Monster, the first that comes to mind is the theme. It's themed to the Loch Ness Monster, but it got a great refurbishment in 2024, and in my opinion, it is the best executed of the tour gone wrong themes at the park. There are many rides at the park that are themed to something supernatural getting in the way of your standard tour of Europe, including Darkoaster and Escape from Pompeii. This one is much stronger, with the queue not feeling like a clash of different styles, the ride having some fun audio bit as you approach the lift hill, the great theming of the indoor section that I won't spoil, but will recommend you sit on the right side of the car of if you want to really enjoy it, and a great statue of the Loch Ness Monster at the bottom of the second loop. This is all well and good, and is only aided by the setting. For those who don't know, Busch Gardens Williamsburg's setting is gorgeous. There's a bit of a ravine, with the gorgeous Rhine River flowing through it. Not the actual Rhine River, but still, there is water at the bottom of the roller coaster, so it really does feel like you might actually be touring Loch Ness. That's so much fun. This is without a doubt one of the most scenic aero loopers out there. The only other contenders really are Tennessee Tornado and the now defunct Anaconda at King's Dominion, though that one was definitely lower due to the fact that it's just water and not great landscaping surrounding it. So all in all, Loch Ness Monster is not the strongest in terms of thrills. It really is just the 2 loops and the indoor helix. Other than that, it's just a very fun, scenic ride with a great theme that keeps me interested the whole way through. It is still the weakest of the major coasters besides Darkoaster, but that's only a testament to how great the rest of the rides in the park are. Number 9, Finnegan's Flyer. The best of the thrilling flat rides, stronger than things like Catapult for example. This is an S&S Scream and Swing, one of my favorite flat ride models. It has some unique strengths just like Loch Ness Monster, but it does also have some weaknesses that keeps it from being my favorite of this model. The main strength is the presentation. The ride, like any other of the model, has 2 large swinging arms that go opposite directions. It's a spectacle to watch, but this one especially so, because it's right next to the gorgeous entrance to the Ireland area, sitting on its own platform next to a different ravine from Loch Ness Monsters, and that is a great start. But what's especially cool is that to get to the ride, you must cross over a bridge right in front of the Ireland area, and beneath this bridge is a small pond. If you sit on the side of the swinging arms closest to the queue that's actually facing the people getting on next, you will be face to face with that pond. It's a super fun experience, the best view you'll get from any of this ride model in my opinion. Just don't bring any loose articles on the ride or you'll see them splash. And that is such a fun thing. The gorgeous nature of many of the rides here does enhance them, and there are few rides that's truer for than this great flat ride. Unfortunately, the ride does feel a little short. Once the ride started losing speed, I genuinely thought in my mind, wait, it's already slowing down? I could be wrong, but I feel like Serengeti Flyer at Busch Gardens Tampa, which is the same ride model, has a longer cycle, or at least feels that way. Maybe I was just having so much fun on this one that I was like, aw, it's over already? But that is a very minor nitpick. Overall, it's definitely up there as one of the best Scream and Swings, and Scream and Swing is already one of the best flat ride models, so no doubt my favorite flat ride in the park. Number 8 is Verbolten. Okay, this one's unpopular. I know a lot of people who put Verbolten in their top 3. I'm going off my 2023 ride here only, because I did not get to ride it last time. I think it's a very good ride, but I think it's the least thrilling of the remaining roller coasters, and the theming is not good enough to make up for that deficit. So let's go through the experience. I love the way the ride starts, being really slow but then going up to the launch track and you go upward, and you get a surprising amount of punch on that launch. It's a very good start. And then the indoor roller coaster portion is similar to Revenge of the Mummy's main thrilling parts. It's very good, I think it's about as intense as that, and definitely a strong start. But it's not the strongest, and the main issue I really do have is the theming. The ride is very dark so you can't see the next turn, and that's all well and good. It's basically like Revenge of the Mummy. But one weird thing to me is that this is the most expensive roller coaster the park ever built, and the theming within this area is quick flashes of blacklight leaves. It's not bad per se, but I just don't think it's strong enough theming for me to say, what an insane, well-themed, immersive experience. Frankly, I think Loch Ness Monster has better theming overall. That said, the indoor portion is good. I do think that once you're done with the thrilling portion, the amount of time it takes to get to the next bit and the launch back outside is a little lengthy and does mess with the pacing for a roller coaster fan like myself. And generally, there is a surprise in this ride I won't spoil here, but there are other rides with a similar surprise, and I find all of the other ones I've done to be overall better incorporated. So I don't think the surprise on here is quite amazing. Luckily, the final outdoor portion is good. Even though it does have similar pacing issues with another brake run at the top of the hill, I love the drop over the Rhine River, and the final turns provide some decent speed. What else can I say about this one? I think it's a good family launch coaster. Some have said it's underrated in intensity, and I respect that take. I personally didn't get that. To me, it's just a very solid family launch coaster, but it doesn't have anything super spectacular in it to make it one of the best roller coasters in the park. Number 7, Tempesto. This above verbolten will definitely turn some heads, but I do stand by it. This is a Premier Ride Skyrocket 2, a baffling model because I think one of the 3 I've been on is great, one of the 3 I've been on is not good, and one of the 3 I've been on is in the middle where it's still very good. And this is that middle one. The main issue is before you even actually start the ride. The restraints. The comfort collar, as it's called, fails to live up to that name, as it's very awkward to put on, and just feels kind of weird. It's not painful per se, but it's not a great start. The actual roller coaster itself is good. It provides a great thrill overall. My favorite part is the final forward launch that gets you up the hill with a great pop of airtime genuinely. That's a really strong start to the ride. After that, the pacing is a little weird, you certainly stop a lot, and the inversions were clearly made to give you a lot of hang time, but the restraints don't necessarily allow for that. But fortunately, the ride keeps good speed and intensity throughout, and is generally better paced than Loch Ness Monster or Verbolten, so it is generally more up my alley. Overall, there's not much else to say about Tempesto. It's just a very good fun ride, and I get that these rides are shut down a little bit for now being very common clones. By shut down I don't mean in a literal sense, and I'm glad for that, because it is a good ride overall. It's not the best at the park, but it provides the most thrilling moments I've talked about so far. Number 6, Invadr. This was the hardest one to place. Based on my 2023 visit only, Invadr would be very comfortably in 6th place. I thought it was a genuinely fantastic wooden coaster. It is more family oriented than other ones, but it provides a great sense of speed and thrill that I would say is on par with, if not better, than Wicker Man at Alton Towers. It was incredible to me. My night ride was unforgettable, and on my first visit to the park, or I should say second, but first one where I did a lot of major coasters, it was my number 3. I thought Invadr was great, and was so excited to be back on it again. I sat in the back row to get the perfect experience of intensity, and right when the ride left the station, I knew it was not the same Invadr it used to be. The ride used to be glass smooth. It is very much not anymore. If you sit closer toward the front, which I did confirm, it is not super rough, but this ride has definitely gotten much bumpier than it used to be. It's not a painful bumpiness. I can't remember any moments that were super jarring or hurt me, but it is different. And I don't think Invadr is the sort of ride where the rattliness feels like a classic rattle, and I don't think it makes the ride experience better. I understand why it happened, it wasn't a choice to make it more rough, obviously, but I do think it slightly takes away from the experience. But that's not really the main reason Invadr moved down for me. The bigger reason was the second half of the ride. The second half was not as well paced as I remembered it being. I don't know if it genuinely got worse or if I was always just wrong, but once you take that second dive sorta into the ravine, the ride loses a lot of speed, and it never really regains that. The best wooden coasters, heck, the best roller coasters, are those that keep their speed till the very end. This one does feel like it could have ended sooner, and it would still feel like a more complete ride experience. I'm not saying it has to be going at full speed into the brake run like Iron Gwazi, but I do think the ride loses some of the thrill that it did have originally. Still, there is no doubt that the first half of the ride is just as good as always. The first drop is shocking, there are 2 excellent airtime moments, the ride is rowdy in a good way at plenty of points, and it is almost up there with Wicker Man for me based on those thrills alone. It is a very good wooden roller coaster, a very accessible one for families if they can tolerate the bumpiness, and while it is not comfortably in 6th place anymore, really duking it out with both Tempesto and Verbolten, that 3-horse race was genuinely so hard to rank, but I did settle with Invadr at the top of that. Number 5, Apollo's Chariot. The B&M Hyper roller coaster at the park, this was the original of the model. B&M Hypers are one of my favorite roller coasters out there. They often have great airtime, an awesome sense of speed, grand sweeping memorable elements, and a great openness to the trains. Apollo's Chariot really only has that last point, unfortunately. It was the first one, obviously, and many people have already told me that I should be easier on it and say it's not the worst because of the fact that it's a prototype. I disagree. If anything, I think that's all the more reason to understand why it is the weakest one. And it still is a great ride. The biggest issue with it is that it doesn't really provide the same airtime or sense of speed as the other B&M Hypers. All of them are stronger in this regard, in my opinion. It still has decent floater airtime, but nothing like Mako or Diamondback, for example. And the second half loses a lot of speed, to the point where the hypercoaster this feels the most like is Steel Force at Dorney Park, which is once again, no doubt a great ride, but just not an excellent ride. Frankly, most B&M Hypers I've been on would rank much higher on the list, at least 2 spots. And Apollo's Chariot lack of thrills does hold it back in that regard. But fortunately, it does have a great strength that very few other B&M Hypers have that must be talked about. That is the setting. Apollo's Chariot might be the roller coaster that benefits the most from Busch Gardens Williamsburg's setting. It is gorgeous. The way you go into the forest, past the body of water, traversing this wonderful area that's technically a parking lot coaster, because you are right next to where the cars are, but it's got to be the best looking parking lot coaster ever. It feels like you're traveling through the forest. And the fact that there are night ride possibilities means that you can get an experience on Apollo's Chariot very reminiscent of some of the best roller coasters for night rides, such as the Beast at Kings Island. Not quite up there, but pretty darn close. In terms of B&M hypercoasters, I think Apollo's Chariot is one of the 2 best for the setting. The other contender being Goliath at Six Flags Over Georgia for an entirely different reason that's honestly not even that fair. There is no doubt in my mind, Apollo's Chariot has the most beautiful setting of any hypercoaster I've done, and it is an immaculate adventure as a result. Number 4, Griffon. Griffon is the B&M dive coaster. I got on that one for the first time just last week, and I'm so happy I did. It's very similar to SheiKra at Busch Gardens Tampa, a ride of the same model, and I will compare those in a later video. I'm planning to do a whole Busch Gardens Tampa versus Busch Gardens Williamsburg thing later down the line. Stay tuned for that. Let's just talk about the experience of Griffon. The first fun little thing is that the trains have 10 seats in each row, as opposed to 8 like SheiKra, so that was a confusing start to me, but not a bad thing. As you climb the lift hill, you are treated to one of the best views I've ever had on any roller coaster. The thing about dive coasters is they do a 180 or so degree turnaround, so you are treated to a nearly panoramic view of the surrounding area of Busch Gardens Williamsburg. And for nearly all 180 degrees, you can see the gorgeous James River. It is a stellar view, similar to that of Millennium Force's view of Lake Erie, and that is high praise. The final thing you see is the Anheuser-Busch factory, which is not as appealing, but it leads into the first drop. Fun thing about dive coasters, you are held over the side for a pretty long time. Griffons felt especially long to me, honestly. And after that, you dive 200 feet underneath a bridge that you can stand on, so that's a very fun experience whether you're on or off ride, and you enter a massive Immelman. This Immelman is a very floaty inversion, not at all a bad one. The next thing you have is the brake run, and I don't love this moment. It really kills all the speed, and I feel like SheiKra didn't used to have that. I feel like it came in a couple years back, but I could just be misremembering. But fortunately, Griffon's second half has some great moments. you enter a second inversion with a surprising amount of whip, and you build up a crazy amount of speed, which is especially evident as you go into a wild pop of airtime right before the splashdown. The splashdown is iconic, it's great to watch, and as you enter the final turnaround, you actually go underneath the track that just got soaked by the splashdown, and I was scared that I was going to get super wet because of how much water was coming down, but it turns out that you don't actually get wet, or at least I got lucky. It was a very fun ending to the ride though. Simply put, Griffon has many of the strengths of SheiKra, with some tricks of its own, one of the best views from any roller coaster lift hill, and all in all, one of the best rides at Busch Gardens Tampa. Number 3, Alpengeist. My favorite ride at the park on my second visit. Alpengeist is a B&M inverted roller coaster, another of my favorite models, and Alpengeist is among the very best. I would call it my 4th favorite invert. More on that some other time. Alpengeist has 2 very distinct halves. The first, I got to re-experience, and I forgot just how demented it is. The first drop is huge, one of the biggest on any B&M invert. The lift hill is nearly 200 feet tall, and that's a pretty crazy start. And after that, you have a whippy Immelman, an intense vertical loop, and maybe the best Cobra roll on any roller coaster. It is wild how forceful and fast the ride is for that first half. Definitely one of the most intense moments on any roller coaster in the park. After that, you do hit a brake run that takes away some speed, but the second half is still good. It not only maintains the intensity, but does have an added bonus of being very scenic. This part focuses a little more on the theming and the near miss elements. Your feet come very close to the ground, and they had some artificial rock that was put in to look like snowy mountains, and you get very close to that too. So the ending of the ride is very visually appealing, and somewhat replicates what it feels like to be skiing on some more tight slopes. This part is not as intense per se, but you still have 2 good inversions, and all in all, I certainly enjoy the entirety of the ride. I've talked about Alpengeist before, so I'll leave it at that. It is definitely the best B&M roller coaster at the park, one of the best roller coasters at the park, and no doubt, a high-tier B&M invert. Number 2 is the Busch Gardens Railway. This may shock people. I very often have roller coasters taking up most if not all the top spots. I don't always give a lot of attention to non-thrill rides, but the Busch Gardens Railway is one of my favorite non-thrill rides I've ever done. I can make a whole video talking about this one, but simply put, Busch Gardens Railway is scenic. As a transportation ride, I think it's flawed. The Scotland and Festa Italia stations are so close to each other that it feels like most people should just walk. I think it would have made more sense to have a station in Germany than Italy. But still, it is one of my favorite rides because I don't ride it for transportation. I ride it to take the full circuit and go around the entire park, getting some of the best views you will ever get at any theme park. Let's sort of talk through the loop. I've always started the loop in France after a ride on invadr, so after that, you go past some nice foliage. There's a lot more of it in the summer for sure. One perk of the ride is that it's different at every season, so you can get a whole lot of different views at any different time of year. And at a certain point, you approach Griffon, but then you are going in the ravine to an extent between Finnegan's Flyer and the major roller coasters Loch Ness Monster, Alpengeist, and Griffon, getting extremely photogenic views of all of them. When you stop in Scotland, to your right is the main rock that the Loch Ness Monster Helix and theme portion takes place in, and that's also super fun to watch the roller coaster car go in and out of. Once you leave that area, you approach Festa Italia on the shortest and least scenic leg of the trip, but you still begin to get some views of Tempesto, Apollo's Chariot, and Pantheon, and that is certainly fun. Then there's the final leg back to France, and this is unbelievable. You go past Pantheon, getting a great full view of that layout, and that's just the start. You then go over the Rhine River on a bridge, and as you look out to the right, you can see Pantheon, Verbolten, Griffon, Alpengeist, and Loch Ness Monster in all their glory. It is one of the single most photogenic areas of any theme park I've ever been to, a serious contender for number 1. And on the left side of you have dense forest. On my second visit to the park, I saw a herd of deer on the left side within that forest. And it really does hit home just how great the landscaping is, and how this is not in the middle of a big city like a lot of other parks are. It's built around a beautiful forest. So you have great nature on one side, both sides in fact, and wonderful architecture on the right. I did this ride at sunset in 2023, and it was simply breathtaking. And my 2025 ride had a perk of its own. The new Wolf's Revenge takes place primarily in the back of the park, and when you're on the train, once the ride opens, the car will go directly over the train, and you get a great view of nearly the entire layout. That's so much fun. After that, you wrap your way back around, going through Invadr, and you finally make it to the station again. Let's leave it at that. Busch Gardens Railway is my personal favorite train ride I've ever done, even against things like Dollywood and Silver Dollar City. Of every theme park train, this is the best. It's the most scenic, and that is what I love most about it. It really does show you just how great the landscaping, appearance, and overall theming are at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. It is one of the best looking parks I've ever been to. The train is the perfect example of that. And if I were to rank every single non-roller coaster or thrill ride I've ever done, I can almost guarantee this is in the top 10. But number 1 had to be a roller coaster. It's Pantheon. Pantheon, I'm so happy I got on this time. It is without a doubt one of the best launch coasters I've ever done. It starts out interesting. It's a slow, meandering beginning similar to Verbolten. But once you hit the launch, you immediately enter a great inversion with a quick bit of hang time. And then the ride really begins. The first launch into the top hat, which is the second launch overall, provides a surprising amount of kick for the first launch. When you don't make it up, it's a lot of fun because you then fall backwards, go into an even more powerful second launch backwards, going up a vertical spike. You stop for a moment, and that's great. Then, the final launch. Actually insane how much speed you build up. This is the fastest multi-launch coaster in the world, in fact. And the airtime pop before the top hat might genuinely be my favorite moment of the whole ride. It's wild how violent that is. Then you go over the top hat, slowly cresting over it with a great bit of airtime, and then you complete the rest of the layout. With great moments, such as an awesome outer bank curve toward the water, similar to that of Steel Vengeance's, and almost as good. And then you go around a turn into a stall. I love stalls as inversions, and this one is better than the one on Iron Gwazi at Busch Gardens Tampa. So that's excellent. Then you make some final turns, and you have so much speed going into the final brake run, but the ride still feels so complete. To me, Pantheon is like a mix of Hyperia at Thorpe Park and Maverick at Cedar Point. It has the top-notch elements of Hyperia, but it has a much whippier and faster pace than that, similar to Maverick. It's the best of both worlds, and something very few launch roller coasters have. Hyperia is not a launch coaster, but you get the point. And I'm not trying to say those other two rides fall short in those regards, but Pantheon has better elements than Maverick overall in my opinion, and it has better pacing than Hyperia. And that's just straight up impressive, because those two rides are also among my very favorites in the world. But Pantheon does everything right from a thrill perspective. I will say, some have said the theming brings the ride down. I've made clear throughout the video, thrills are what I love. Theming is not as important to me. And I think the area of the ride looks good enough and you go by it fast enough that I don't worry about the theming. But it still might have been cool to have some columns and near miss elements in that first part, and maybe lining the main launch track before you really go through the super fast parts of the ride. To me, that would have been an added bonus as opposed to a necessity, because overall, Pantheon is still one of the best roller coasters I've ever done. And my night ride on it, with the great stargazing at the very start being unexpected, and the unpredictability of what was going to happen, as well as the fact that the ride was just hauling. It was unforgettable. I would say overall, Pantheon is an easy contender for my top 5 launch coasters, especially now that Top Thrill Dragster and King of Decay are gone. But after Velocicoaster, Maverick, and Lightning Rod, I think Pantheon's next up. Pantheon is one of the best roller coasters I've ever been on. I said that already, but it simply must be reiterated, because that is a huge deal. And for that reason, even though I love the Busch Gardens Railway with all my heart, Pantheon is the #1 ride at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this very long and in-depth ranking. Please comment down below your thoughts on the list and your own top 10 down below. Subscribe for more theme park videos, including a Busch Gardens Williamsburg versus Tampa coming up soon. I'll see you next time.